Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 179. We are coming from Chof Hei Elul yesterday, which is the final countdown to the Rosh Hashanah, to the new year, Rosh Hashanah, the last 12 days, and as is explained in the Selichos, that now each day of the last month, each of the last days of Elul corresponds to a month of the past year. So the accounting that we make for the past year, so Chof Hei Elul corresponds to Tishrei of last year, Yutesel to Cheshvan, Chof Elul to Kislev, and so on, until Rosh Hashanah corresponds to the Elul of last year. In some Sikhs, the Rebbe also says, being that this is a preparation for the new year, the 12 days also correspond to how we prepare, not just the accounting for the past, but how we prepare for the new year. And this is a chiddush from the Rebbe, that the Chof Hei Elul prepares for Tishrei of next year, and then Yutesel for Cheshvan of next year, all the way to Elul of next year. So this is classic, the Rebbe's approach, similar to how he speaks about Shabbos, that Shabbos, on one hand, Vayechulu is an aliyah, it elevates the entire past week, but also Menei Mizbarach and Kuliyim, Shabbos also blesses the coming week. As the Zohar says, Shabbos, the man, the Lechem and Hashamayim, both physically in the time of, in the Midbar, when the Jews were in the wilderness, and now Beruchnius is manufactured, so to speak, on Shabbos. So Shabbos also has the dual qualities that Elul has, both in accounting for the past and preparing for the future. Not exactly, but it's just as a similarity. One of the most, I would say the most, I don't like the word popular, but many questions have come in due to the fact that right now, as we speak, Hurricane Irma is battering Miami, Florida, and then other states as well. And what are we supposed to make about this, especially coming in the heels of Hurricane Harvey that devastated Houston? And before that was a solar eclipse, another natural, so to speak, event. There are solar flares, unique, rare solar flares that have not taken place in years and decades, if not century, that are affecting Europe and other places in the world, as well as a devastating earthquake, also in a century hasn't affected, has not, in over a century, such a high magnitude earthquake struck Mexico this a few days ago. So we know we believe in divine providence, and we believe what the Rambam says, that when a calamity strikes, it's insensitive and even cruel. Achzari is to ignore it and make believe mikra nikris as if, okay, just random. And he says clearly we have to take it to heart to mend our own ways. Clear Rambam and Hilchos Tainis, it's a basis for so much of life that nothing just happens, everything has a deeper reason. However, to speculate what exactly the divine reasons for this is beyond my scope at least, and but we could use as precedents that we heard from the Rebbe or other things that say in Sfarim about events like this. So first of all, I want to just begin with a prayer and a blessing that our hearts and prayers go out to all the people in these stricken areas, that Hashem should protect them all from no damage at all, not to life, not to property, not to any other aggravation, and to weather the storm and to get through it and become stronger people in the process, as we saw in Houston, and I'm sure we're seeing in Florida as well, and the other states where where the hurricane is affecting, as well as the Caribbean and the islands, including some of the smaller islands in the Bahamas, and before that in the other islands that are devastated. You also see the outpouring of the nobility and the dignity and the beauty that human beings show, which always in times of catastrophe could either bring out the worst in people, could bring out the best in people. This again doesn't explain why it's happening, but nevertheless, we have to recognize and acknowledge that. So our hearts and prayers go out to all the people that everyone should be protected, whoever remained in these areas, as well as I said, be able to help each other in this process, in getting through it, and then rescuing and protection, and then afterwards, obviously, the rebuilding. It's also impossible to ignore the fact that it's all happening in the month of Elul. Elul is, as I just said, a month of accounting and a month of preparation. And when you see things happening so literally one after the next, you wonder. So we have from the Rebbe a few times that the Rebbe mentioned earthquake, mentioned hurricanes and strange and very powerful winds, unnatural winds, in the sense like it doesn't come often, and spoke about it as a wake-up call, using the Rambam, of course, as a wake-up call. But I want to qualify, the most important thing is it's not about finger pointing. Nowhere does it say that our job is to go find out and say, because somebody sinned, that's why this happened. The Rambam is saying clearly you have to look at yourself. You have to look in your own heart and see what I can do to make better. But this is not about blaming things. I remember when the Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, so people wanted to associate it then with events that happened in Gaza and so on. We have no right to start saying that things happen because somebody else sinned. You can look into your own heart and say, what can I do better? Like Yonah did when Yonah was on the ship and it was a storm. So what did he say? Ultimately he said, it's because of me. He didn't blame anybody else. I'm sure there are other people on that ship that not all of them were tzaddikim and perfect people. He looked at himself that this is all happening because of me. So it's also not about guilt and self-blaming, but it's about introspection and taking serious when something happens. And yes, we're all connected. So even if you're not living in that region, when you see a thing happens like that affects so many people, millions of people, and has taken some lives, and hopefully not more than those that have already been taken, you have to look inside your heart, and what better time in the month of El? That's a general perspective on it in that context. As far as the actual events, I just want to make a few comments that come to mind. And number one, that we have to also be very careful, just as I said, not finger pointing, also not to become sensationalist and start looking, here's a medrash and here's that, because these are things that sometimes outside of our domain, and people like to tend to say, oh, this is the fulfillment of a prediction, or this is the fulfillment of some apocalypse, or the fulfillment of some apocalyptic end of days. That's not our role to do that. However, as I said, to take a lesson in our lives, that we can grow from it, that absolutely. So a few things come to mind. I remember when it was the solar eclipse, which preceded the hurricane by a week, I believe. It was a big event, the solar eclipse. Also once in a rare that the United States, there was a band that saw the complete eclipse, and the rest of the United States saw partial eclipse. So there was, I don't remember where I heard it, but there was a headline or someone made an announcement and said this was the first time in years that people looked up to heaven instead of looking at their cell phones. Then, of course, they'd use their cell phones to take a picture of that heaven, which was interesting. And the same thing right now, suddenly, where the headlines were being dominated by politics and by polarization and by all kinds of man-made nonsense, you can call it that, suddenly we are looking at real life. We realize in humility and humbled by forces, with all our technology, we have not figured out a way how to diffuse a storm like this. With all our so-called invulnerability, we are quite vulnerable and quite fragile. So in that sense, it's also a reminder of what's real and what's not real in this false world. So often we can gravitate to convincing ourselves that we are invulnerable, that we are all powerful because we have our gadgets and we have our technologies. And this is a very, very, very strong reminder. Another point I'd like to add is that there's 50 years ago, the Rebbe said a fascinating sikha. It was Shabbos Mevorchim El. So it was the Shabbos blessing the month of El that we are in right now. Tavshin Chof Zayin, Shabbos Parsha De'eh. And later that sikha was published and edited in Likutei Sichos, volume 19, page 158. And the Rebbe referred there to a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe on Pesach, where he spoke about the month of El. And what did the Frierdiker Rebbe say? He was talking about what the month of El, well, Shabbos Mevorchim El, the Shabbos that blessed El, looked like in Irabir, in the capital of Lubavitch, in the town of Lubavitch. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is Pesach Tafresh Tzadik Daled. That would be 1934. And the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe says, Dem Shabbos Mevorchim El in Lubavitch, Hagamas fleck nach seiner Klor Zun scheinen dicke Tag, that the Shabbos when they blessed El in Lubavitch, even though it still was a clear sunny day, the Aviv gebitten, the environment, the atmosphere changed. And so even feeling that El Reach began to feel the so-called aroma of El, and so geblosen at Shuva wind, and it was already blowing a Shuva wind. And the Rebbe, of course, asked the question, firstly, why is this sikha said on Pesach. Pesach is the exact opposite of Elul. Elul is the month that the Avodah starts initiative from below, as we spoke about in the previous weeks. I am to my beloved, and then my beloved responds. Asusa de latata, the awakening from below, initiated effort, and then the response from above. Pesach is the opposite. V'deidili v'ani loi, as the Mamorim Chassidus explain. The opposite. First my beloved to me, and then so punkt on Pesach, which is the opposite of Tishrei. Tishrei is Mamat L'mayla Tov Shin Reish. It's like goes Mamat L'mayla. And Nisan is Mamayla L'mata from the above downward. Why would he say a Sicha on Pesach about El? And then what are these diyukim, these different expressions that even though it was still a very sunny day, as you felt that the atmosphere changed, that you felt the aroma of El, and the wind of Tshuva began to blow. And the Rebbe explains, a short and compact Sicha, explains beautifully that every Asusa del Tata, even the initiative of El, and even the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, which is what gives El the power, comes from something higher, that God gives us those 13 attributes, but that it all originates from Nisan. So the Asusa del Eila, the awakening from above, when the Jews left Mitzrayim and left Egypt, gave power that we should be able to, in the month of El, take our initiative. So absolutely the initiative is ours in El, but it comes from the power of Pesach. And with that, the Rebbe explains these expressions. That the sunny day refers to the Gili of Elikus. That even though it's a sunny day, why does it say, the Rebbe says in the footnote, why does it say it's still a sunny day? Because the general work in the summer is Mamayla Lamata. So Amshachal Mamayla, because you have then the time, it says in some Amar Chassidus that in the summer it's easier to serve God because you have the Gili Shemesh Amagan Hashem Elikim. The sun represents divine revelation. So it was still a sunny day, so we have the power of the sunny day, and that in turn changes, that in turn gives the power that the environment, the atmosphere should change. And the atmosphere changing, the Avir, as the Rebbe explains, Avir is not something that takes any effort. When you breathe, you don't have to make any effort to breathe, thank God. That's how God blessed us. And Avir is one of the ultimate necessities that a human being has. We have to always breathe. Every breath, kol neshama neshama ta'alukah. Every breath, neshama is also pronounced neshima, breath, that our breath comes automatically. So that's amshachal mamayla. And that in turn evokes our effort, number one, in the ruach of tshuva, the wind of tshuva, that which means that the ruach toshev elokim asher nasana. Tshuva is compared to a wind. It says the spirit that returns, as ruach toshev, the neshama is called returns to God, beseeches, seeks out, and yearns to connect. So the word ruach, the wind of the neshama, but some the nefesh ruach neshama chay yechida. So the soul is sometimes called the wind, the air. In this case, we'd say wind ruach, and that refers to the tshuva wind, that the wind of tshuva ruach toshev is beginning to blow. And the second thing, the reach, which he says is connected also to ruach, because right in the beginning of Chumash and Bereshis, and the second pasuk, it says, after it says beginning, God created heaven and earth, and then it says the world was empty and chaotic, or empty and post and vist, and the darkness filled the entire existence. Ruach, first time Ruach is mentioned. Ruach Elikim, the Spirit of God, hovered over the water. What's Ruach? Ruach is Ruchi Shel Mashiach. And the Rebbe says that that's connected to Reach, because Mashiach will be Meirach V'dayin, he will judge, he'll have that sense of smell. They'll be able to judge by that sense. So Reach of El is referring to that Ruach, which is also comes from the word of Tshuva that brings to Ruchi Shel Mashiach, as the Rebbe explains in the Sikha here. So based on this, perhaps, this is a perhaps, because when you think about it, the first thing was an eclipse of the sun, and the sun is the sunlight, and yet, as the Rebbe explains, though the sun is eclipsed, and it has its negative implications, but right afterwards, without any effort, the sun is back in full glory. So it's a sun connection. A sun reminding us, we look up to heaven, we see the sun reminding us of Shemesh Umagan Hashem Elikim. And right afterwards, with the winds, hurricane is a strong wind. Chassidus talks about Ruach, Eise Ruach, that one wind brings another wind. As a matter of fact, in discussion, it's different Maimorim from the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, talks about how mountains are formed. So one of the ways is through the winds. There's a beautiful Sikha, Bahar, Tov Shemem Zayim, where the Rebbe talks about how mountains are formed in the Aveda of it and talks about the Ruach. So when we talk about Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, so Ruach being one of the four elements, Ruach is the winds that shape things. Powerful winds are very strong shapers. In Aveda, Ruach refers to Asusal Data, Ruach Eise Ruach, that when we allow our wind, so to speak, to reach up, the Ruach Elikim, Ruach Elikim, Ruach Asher Toshav Elikim Asher Nasana, which is the idea of tshuva, as he says, that it is that the Ruach is referred to returns, that in turn brings a wind from above. So though a hurricane per se can be devastating, as we unfortunately witnessing, but as if some of you may have seen, I wrote an article last week about the interview with Harvey, that hurricanes fundamentally are part of nature and are part of God's way of keeping the balance of the earth in place, as are earthquakes. The devastation is when human beings are in its path. But when hurricanes happen at sea, or earthquakes happen under the ocean, and many happen all the time, those are part of the process of balancing the Earth's orbit, balancing the tensions that are created. Think of a big hurricane as like a vacuum cleaner, cleaning out the systems that are either in balance due to the heat and cold meeting, or other different balances that are due to the Earth's orbit, as I mentioned. So the devastation is when human beings are in that path. And if you look at it, many of these natural disasters are in places that initially people didn't live, whether it's during the fault lines in, let's say, California or Mexico, or which was desert land, or places like whether Louisiana or California or Florida, which were swamp land or rainforests and so on. And I'm not suggesting that humans don't belong to live there, but the reality is that the hurricanes themselves are not the devastating thing. It's when people are on that path, their path, which happens unfortunately. But we have to look at it like this. As I said, we have to look, God should protect us all, that we shouldn't have to have such wake-up calls. But on the other hand, when you look at something of this type of event, of this magnitude, it's important to take the lessons. And perhaps it's connected somewhat in wakening up our own ruach, a healthy ruach, that we don't need to have reminders in an unhealthy way or such a powerful and devastating way, but a reminder to wake up the spirit and the winds of our own soul, the ruach that begins to blow in Elul as it was in Lubavitch, and the same thing with each of us where we are right now. So that simply means that it's a wake-up call to do what you can do to blow the proper winds and create the balance in wind, the wind to wind, ruach eise ruach, that allows this to take place. And as I mentioned, the beginning of Chumash, the first time ruach, wind, is mentioned, it's mentioned in a positive way. The wind of God, the spirit of God, ruach as a spirit, or you could say it's a wind as well, hovered over the water, which is referring to the spirit of Mashiach. The second time, by the way, that ruach is mentioned is very interesting as well. And that is that when after Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, it says that they hid themselves, they were ashamed, they covered themselves, their eyes were open, they covered themselves out of shame. And then Hashem comes and says, where are you? He says, but when it says Hashem comes to the Gan Eden, it says, Beruach Hayim, meaning like in the wind of the day, which everyone wonders, what does that mean exactly? But if you think about it like where are you, as the Alter Rebbe told the minister when he was in prison, where are you is the eternal call to each one of us. Where do you stand? You're this in this age. What have you done with your life? Hashem is like saying, I don't recognize you. Where's the Tzelem Elokim? So sometimes you could be sitting there, someone, you say, where are you? Of course you know they're sitting there, but they space out, or you don't recognize them of living up to what they're capable of. So essentially, Vayeka is the call of tshuva to Adam. And therefore the word Ruach Hayim, Ruach again, Ruach Toshav Elokim Asher Nasana, that it's referring and hinting to the Ruach and spirit of tshuva, which is the Ayeka. It's explained and also in some form that Ameh and others explain that Ayeka is connected to Tishrei, and they go into the details of how the letters and the gematrias and so on. One more thing I'd like to add as complete aside, you may be familiar in Chassidus sites from Zohar that there's a Oyer Mayim Rakia. Oyer Mayim Rakia, just for the record, is really refers to the original, in the beginning of the creation, you see, Vahi Emer Elokim Yehi Oyer, second day of Mayim and Rakia. Some people ask me that question, so just mentioning it, but before that there's Ruach, and there's the Ruach that is that we're discussing here, is that right in the beginning of creation, God already implanted the real wind, the real spirit that hovers over the water, and that is the spirit of Mashiach. So all of this, we should only have the positive sides of learning the lessons, the Ruach of Tshuva, the Tshuva law, which is Ruach HaTov Shel Elokim Asher Nasan, is referring to Tshuva. Even the Chassidus says that it's not like the Elam, the world makes a mistake, that Tshuva is only for a sin. Tshuva is also the idea of reconnecting, return, not just repent, returning to your own source, and that is the word Ruach is used. So these are a few thoughts, and if you want more information on this, feel free to browse on our site, meaningfullife.com. I've written a few articles on the topic in different angles about these issues. But this is a summation just to address, and again, I want to conclude again with a blessing and prayer that everyone there should only have a gebut gebenched year, and this challenges that began here in the last in the last days of Elul before Chayel, and it was going through right now, should not harm anyone, and should only in anything wake up the ruach in each one of us in the proper way, the spirit and the wind within our souls. With that, let me also add, since this coming Shabbos is Nitzavim-Vayeilech, and it's Shabbos Selichos, so everything I've said obviously accelerates as we get closer to Tishrei. Selichos, of course, is usually the week, or a little less than a week, depending on the year's kvias, and this year is going to be literally, I think the shortest amount. Selichos is just Shabbos, and then Wednesday night is already Rosh Hashanah. So we know that Selichos intensifies the preparation, and Nitzavim-Vayeilech, Atem Nitzavim Hayim, as the Mefarshim, the commentaries say, is Rosh Hashanah, that today you stand upright and strong, and all the categories of Jews, from the Sheichem Shiftechem, from the leaders, till Chet V'Etzecha V'Shevi Memecha, Chet V'Etzecha V'Shevi Memecha, even the wood choppers and the water carriers, everyone stands equal in Rosh Hashanah, Hayim. And as the Rebbe explains from Chassidus, from Tzemach Tzedek, Nitzavim-Melech, you stand strong. And at the same time, it comes together with Vayeilech this year. Vayeilech refers to movement. Vayeilech, movement, even though it's Vayeilech Mesha, but the word itself means movement. So that together with standing strong, we also, like a tree, solidly rooted and grounded, but at the same time, we continuously grow. So you bring together both the solidity and the consistency of Nitzavim, Nitzavim-Melech, a strong foundation, as well as constant growth, which is as we prepare for the new year. A short word from the Parsha. Additionally, we are also this week is Chof Hei Elul, will be of course the 5,778th birthday of the world, and the Rosh Hashanah, even though we say Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha, today is the day of the beginning of your handiwork of your creation. So Chassidus asks the question: it's the sixth day of creation. Zeh Hayom should be Chof Hei Elul, the 25th of Elul. Rosh Hashanah is the day when Adam and Eve were created, the human being. And the answer, of course, given is because the whole purpose of Chof Hei Elul and 6 days of creation was for the crown jewel, because who fulfills the purpose of existence, and that's where you count, where you say the beginning of the year. So technically, yes, the creation began 6 days earlier, but the 6 days earlier is like the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, preparing the table for the special guest. And when do you start counting and you say, when is the new year? You say in the day when the special guest, meaning the human being, comes and has the power, as Adam and Chava did, to elevate. They gathered the entire world and they honored God, the first crowning and coronation of God by a human being, first Rosh Hashanah, which was that Friday. But nevertheless, we still remember Chof Hei Elul, but we remember and think when we see a big world out there, including everything that's going on in this great big world, with the 7 billion people in it, and the hurricanes and the earthquakes and all the other events that happen, all started on the birthday of the world was Chof Hei Elul. But we have to realize that that is only the means. Those are the stepping stones. That's the platform. The platform is for each human being, you and I, to look at these events and learn the lessons to become greater people, to elevate ourselves and elevate the world around us. So Chof Hei Elul encourages us. Chof Hei Elul is focusing on, here is what I've given you. I've given you all these different resources called the world, and now comes Rosh Hashanah. What are you going to do with it all? So Chof Hei Elul reminds us of our mission as well. I should also mention, since tonight is September 11th, and since we're already talking about all the current events, September 11th, 16 years ago, was when the attack, the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and it was, in a sense, you could say some people felt it was a watershed moment, even though terrorism did not begin on September 11th, but it was brought to these shores here, and things have changed. The world has changed since then in a very dramatic way. So I thought I should mention it as well. First of all, for those that were killed in that morning, and their families who still mourn and grieve over them. I'm familiar with some of them. I've mentioned the stories, especially one who lost her husband, but she was 9 months pregnant, and she had a baby literally almost a week after, a little more than a week afterwards. An Yom Kippur named her son after her late husband, who was killed in the World Trade Center. So obviously our hearts go out to them as well. But like anything, September 11 really remains a so-called mystery. It's still, the story is not over yet. But I've discussed, I believe, on this program, if not on in other classes I've given, that September 11th in a way reminded us of some of the statements in the Zohar and other places that at the end of days there will be conflicts between the so-called the children of Esav, which is the world, the ancestor of the Christian Western Roman world. Remi, Magdiel Zu Remi, Esav's grandson, Magdiel was Roim. And with the children of Yishmael, the son of Avram Avinu, the ancestor of the Arab Muslim world. And that the Jews will always be involved. That Yisrael is always smack in the middle. So here's not the place to go into detail, but since we're talking about September 11th, I thought appropriate to mention. I will mention there's a note from the Rebbe to Rabbi Greenglass, Rabbi Velvet Greenglass, Olav Shalom, who, it looks like from the note of the Rebbe, was around Tovshin Mem, 1980. I may be wrong, but it's around that period in time. And he cites from a Maimer, Matzazu, from the Rebbe Marash, Matzazu Tofreish, is it Matzazu? I think Matzazu Tofreish Mem. Yeah, in Matzazu, the Rebbe Marash writes that Avram Avinu prayed for Yishmael, Lu Yichre Yishmael Lefonov, that Yishmael should represent, he wanted him to prosper, Yishmael his son. And the Rebbe Marash adds, even though Avram knew for sure what Yishmael would do at the end of days, he still prayed for him. So Rabbi Greenglass wrote to the Rebbe and asked the question, what is the Maimer saying? This is Tafresh Mem. Tafresh Matzazu Tafresh Mem, right. Tafresh Mem we're talking about is 1880. And he says to the Rebbe, this may be referring to Zayar Seif Pasha Ve'era. And the Rebbe left that and added the Gam Zayar Seif Pasha Bolok, Zayar at the end of chapter Bolok. And look also, Yisrael Nesha in the Selichos. When the Selichos that are said the morning after September 11th on the third day of Selichos, which says Yisrael Nesha, says Chila Seir V'chesne. That should be eliminated. Seir is a reference to Esav, and Chesne is his father-in-law, Yishmael. And V'oid, the Rebbe says. So just bringing it all together, because all these things indicate other events, a bigger story going on. As I said, let's be brief because of time limitations, but that is just wanted to address that as well. Now, with that said, let's go to some questions, more questions. Here's a good opportunity. If you have any questions, if you have comments, if you have any additions or anything you'd like to add, or in any way comment on the discussions here, please, I welcome, more than welcome. I invite, I can't insist, but I can encourage you to participate by going to meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where we have a forum, an anonymous forum, complete anonymous forum. If you want us to respond to you and you want to give us your email address, please do so. And there you also find all the archives and all the different the essays and all the resources connected to MyLife Chassidus Applied. So as I said, we're in episode 179, so you have plenty of material, including some of the subjects of this period in time of the year, which we've discussed in previous years. And it's easy to find by search and so on. So let us go to some questions here. I will begin with this question, which is foul language used by prominent chassidim. How do you reconcile great chassidim cursing relentlessly at Farbrengens or using foul language in general? Do the words we say not matter? This question is on my mind for a while, and particularly in these days of preparation to Rosh Hashanah, it is something I need to find clarity with. Often I do come across Chassidic people that have many qualities, yet when it comes to their speech, they don't necessarily excel in maintain a level of clean speech only. This is true in general way of talking, and moreover at Farbrengens. There seems to be a laxity in this area. It seems that this goes back to previous generations as well. Many times that I hear a Chassidic story or saying related from previous generations of renowned chassidim, and incorporate at times some foul expressions. I have a very hard time with that. Is it something which is accepted? Why wasn't there emphasis put on eradicating this? Is it somehow part of putting down and bringing out bittul in the fellow party? Of course. Please clarify this mystery. Thank you so much. Wishing you and yours a ksiva v'chsima teva. It's an excellent question. We know the concept of nivel peh. It's not just a chassidic concept. That a person, a mamlechas kain and v'gei kaddish, every detail of that person, how they walk and how they talk and how they behave, including the way they speak, as I said, how they talk, has to be kaddish, has to be from a holy person. We're all kings, malachim, bnei malachim. So how is it possible that a person should speak in ways that are using language that's inappropriate? So let me first unequivocally state that there's no question that it's simply inappropriate to use such language. The fact that there are some chassidim that did, and chassidim who are Yiras Shamayim, and we're not talking about stam people. The fact that today some people use this language, maybe they're not chassidim, maybe they're just using language from the street, and has nothing to do not with bittul, and not with chassidic custom from before. So I would say in most cases it's completely inappropriate, uncalled for, and absolutely hipach Kavanah. If you look at all the farbrengens of the Rebbe, I'm talking about the Rebbe for sure speaking the Lashon Nikiyah. They're always talking about that it says that even in a begnusan shel behemoth, the Torah would change. The Torah wouldn't say behemoth tmeya, which means an impure behemoth, would say behemoth she'ena tehera. So the Torah would add words in order not even to embarrass to speak in a negative way about an animal, let alone about a human being. And how we spoke about so in other words, the way we speak about things. Comes to halacha, then you have to say specifically, this is tameh, this is tayr. But definitely the whole idea of speaking in a clean way, thinking in a clean way, and so on. So what goes on today, you could just call burus or hefkedus, which means just plain, what can I say, how do you say hefkedus, how do you say it? It's just plain recklessness and inappropriate speech, and actually has no basis, and I'm not going to go justify it. Now, let's take a situation where you see a chassid. You see a chassid that is a Yiras Shamayim through and through, day and night, a person who davens hours under the talis, a person who will do anything to help another person, an edler person, refined person. And you find that they said it by fabreng, and they may have used words that would be considered what you call foul language. So once you know that this is the type of person, then of course he has the benefit of the doubt, because you're talking about a chassidic person, not shaykh to be vile or foul or anything that's negative. So you have to say, in some there's an edelkeit, a certain refined element, and he's using a word that either is maybe very explicit, and so on. Now, I'm saying this with a lot of qualification, because obviously you don't want to give any pischim peh, any type of opening that someone says, you know what, you see, it can be used. No. Just like the Rebbe with mashke, the Rebbe says about mashke, that even though chassidim drank, some drank a lot. The Rebbe says a very different time and a different world, and most importantly, it's not just that because people didn't look. It was because the world was a pure world. So even the world, that word that would appear as something that seemed inappropriate, like when someone once said he has the cleanest mind, but sometimes says something there. There are other people who always speak cleanly, but their minds are full of dirt. So I'm not justifying the dirt, obviously, or the vile or foul language, but in a different type of environment, a word like that may have been expressed, and it was coming not from a person who's, God forbid, using street language, but he's using a language either because he wants to make a point, or sometimes it was even showing that they themselves didn't see themselves as so dignified. They used the word like, I'm not a Rebbe, I'm not a tzaddik. They used the expression like that. So how do we thread the needle here to explain that on one hand it's absolutely inappropriate because there's an issa and you're not allowed to speak nevel peh, you're not allowed to use inappropriate words. Not only in the context of God, just in general, a person is supposed to speak a clean language, a holy language. A holy person is supposed to speak holy things. But when you're talking about people like that, just like with Mashke, the Rebbe said, today is not the time anymore. Besides the fact that we're no longer in the shtetl, we don't have that Yiras Shamayim. And there's a lot of things like that when you have someone that has complete Yiras Shamayim, and then when they drank, they used an expression. The expression was to make an emphasis, to underscore something. It was never meant as using just a curse word. And that's why you never saw them just use these words all the time. It was under certain circumstances and certain environments. So I want to, again, repeat myself for the third time. I'm not justifying it, but the being that you may find a Chassidic that did that, that's how I would explain it. And you can see this, it's not uncommon to see something like that, but a person who you respect and is on a high standard, then we can talk in this language. The rest, But the whole thing has no place and no basis, and that's that. That's how I would respond to this. And also, if you look at how these stories where the expression was used, you'll see it's always used in a very edler way, in a refined way. It's not used as some type of like expletive or just throwing out a word. It's used to make emphasis sometimes to describe something like when they're very upset about someone or something that is benaged elokus. They may use a strong expression about that person. And I'm not obviously going to repeat these expressions here, but you look at some of the stories, it brings out a certain point. And again, the emphasis is not on the language, the emphasis is on the message. And since it's coming from a refined place, even that was somewhat refined. But this does not give anybody a license. Be on that level, then we'll talk about it. Like the Rebbe said a number of times, he says about a certain individual that did something inappropriate in trying to hear what the Rebbe was going on in the Rebbe's room. So the Rebbe said, but your grandfather, when he stole a Maimer Chassidic Geneva, but he did it because of Mesiris Nefesh for Chassidus. And thus someone's going to go steal, let's say something, you have the Chassidic Geneva concept. What a Geneva? How could you steal? It's Lo Signev. But there's a Chassidic Geneva, and the Tzemach Tzedek once, with the big fire in Lubavitch, said, he said, well, did anybody steal any of these writings? Because they got burned in the fire. They said, no. He said, where's the Mesiris Nefesh for Chassidus? So it's not, God forbid, advocating or condoning stealing, but there's a Chassidic element for a Chassidic Yid. Stam someone that goes and steals and goes in someone's house or goes and steals a manuscript or a rare sefer or something, and that person might even look at it just to have it, it's completely inappropriate. But you have Chassidic Yid that learned Maimonim, they learned all the Maimonim, then one Maimon they were missing, and that. So if you have all that, then we can start talking. But as long as you don't have that, to go ahead and start trying to use these stories with the Ultra Chassidim or the Chassidim that did sometimes use language that was inappropriate, is definitely not appropriate, obviously. And other examples similarly. The Alter Rebbe, he turned the clock when he learned with the Maggid's son, Rabbi Avraham Malach. So he learned with him Nigla. Alter Rebbe taught him Nigla, and he taught that Alter Rebbe Kabbalah Chassidus. So Alter Rebbe had such geschmack, and the Rabbi Avraham Malach was such a mufshit, so like separate from existence, that he didn't even notice. Alter Rebbe, they would turn the clock in order to have more time learning Primus Ater. So it's just, what's that? That's like Geneva's Das. It's Geneva's Das. There's Geneva, you steal something, you can steal somebody's intentions by fooling them. The Alter Rebbe later said, Mayim Gnuvim Yim Toku, stolen waters are sweeter. Those were the most special moments with those extra minutes that he learned with him. So the Rebbe explains in a number of places that Leisignev, there's the Inyan of Leisignev, you're not allowed to steal, but there's a dash, there's an apostrophe between the Lo and Signev, because there's sometimes Geneva of Gedusha, which doesn't mean, God forbid, anyway, condoning Geneva, theft, God forbid. But in a person like the Alter Rebbe, who is not shaykh to such a thing, and his Mesiris Nefesh, so he went sometimes in a way, and he did for Torah. So someone's going to go say, that's a proof that I'm allowed to go steal whatever I want to steal. Obviously not. Just using some examples to clarify and understand this point here. And again, also in the most edler way, and edler people, you hear the chassidim that sometimes use that language, you look at their lives, they were the most refined people, and it was like shocking sometimes that they even used a word like that. Okay. And I'd love to hear more if anybody wants to comment on this. Let's move on to another topic, and that is reading non-Jewish self-help books. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Recently, I bought Sheryl Sandberg's newest book, Option B, which addresses facing adversity and challenges. I asked my friend if she would read such a book, and she said she wouldn't, as everything can be found in Torah. So why look elsewhere? Besides, she argued, there may be things in the book that are contrary to Torah Chassidishkeit. Furthermore, she said, she wouldn't visit a non-frum therapist for the same reason unless she is specifically instructed by her mashpia to do so. Is this the right approach? Ideally, should a person not look at anything that isn't strictly Torah? Did the Rebbe address these issues? Okay. I believe I've talked about similar topics. We definitely talked about music, and maybe even spoken about books, but I didn't really look up previously. But let me say the following, and this is a very important point, Everything in Torah and Yiddishkeit has the highest standards. Hashem created us, gave us a Torah, and told us in the Torah what is the standard for a person to be like. Whether we can live up to that standard, and each one of us has to try to aspire, whether we actually live up, everybody according to their measure. But we never compromise the standard just because some of us don't live up to it. It's a sikh I'm looking for years. If anybody knows where it is, I'd love to hear the source. The Rebbe, I remember saying once, he says, everybody has flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of your flaws. So the standard must be kept up. So I will speak about this on two levels. Let's talk about the standard. The standard is that Eid is a chelik lekam mal mamish. His soul is a chelik lekam. Your soul came down to this world not to read books, not to do business, not to be a fabricant, a factory owner. You came down to this earth to fulfill a mission that God gave you, 24/7. Now, can we live up to that and 24/7 be that way? Obviously, it's a challenge. But we have to know that is the expectation. You came here on a mission. Like an astronaut goes to outer space, there's a mission. And he dresses for the mission and he eats according to that mission. Every detail of his actions is dependent. It could be life and death. Frierdiker Rebbe has a beautiful mashal about life in this world. He uses the mashal of a diver. In the tzaddiks, I believe, a maimer. A diver, deep sea diving, there's also, there's scuba diving, but there's deep sea diving where the diver goes down with a pipe that's connected to oxygen above. And the pipe is always connected to him. He's going to walk on the seabed and so on. So Frierdiker Rebbe says, so when a diver goes down, for not 1 second can that pipe, God forbid, be severed. That pipe is the connection through mitzvahs that we're connected. When we sense that, then it's not possible for a person to waver. The problem is we don't sense it, because the Eibishter made, person doesn't do a sin except if he has a moment of insanity. Why is insanity? Why isn't it just a taiva? Because it's insane to disconnect yourself from your source of life. To do something that's either damaging to your source of life or to not breathe the oxygen you should be breathing. However, God made a big tzimtzum, concealed it, so it makes it difficult. But the standard is that 24/7 we're on call. We are soldiers in an army. We were sent here. So in that sense, if a person thinks about that, where's there room even for 1 second of bittul teira? Teira is teira's chaim. Our life and our sustenance. Like for 1 second, this person can stop breathing. The fact that we don't feel, like the example in the Gemara Rabbi Akiva gave with the fish. A fish can't leave water for 1 moment. Same thing, Eid can't be separated from Teira for 1 moment. Teira is his water, is his sustenance. The fact that we're capable, that's because we have a nefesh abamis, and God made it difficult, there's concealments, and we're not sensitive, we don't sense it's our oxygen, we think we're still connected, like he says in Tanya. But the standard is there's no room, there's not one second room, not for Sheryl Sandberg's book, and not for thousands of other books or other activities. That's the standard. For me to speak about this and say, realistically, many people don't live up to that, can't begin with that. We have to begin with the standard. So the standard cannot be compromised. That is the standard. Now, practically speaking, can every person live up to that? Obviously not. That's why in Tanya, in Perek Zayin, so he speaks about things that are prohibited. There are things that are mitzvahs. And there are things that's reshus. Reshus means it's neutral. You eat a meal, it's neutral. You could eat the meal and indulge, and it goes into shalosh klippos hanmeis for selfish reasons. You could eat a meal neutrally without any particular kavanah except because you're eating because you need to eat for sustenance. Or you could eat that the sustenance that you get, the strength you get, you do a mitzvah with it. You elevate the food, you make a bracha, etc. So there's a lot of things called reshus, uvdin dechel. It's not Shabbos. Shabbos is Shabbos. In the weekdays we have many things that we're involved. We're supposed to also sanctify that. Then the Alter Rebbe goes on, speaks about chochmas chitzenius, about studying wisdoms that are not Torah, whether it could be mathematics or science, or for that matter, therapy or psychiatry, or a book like Sheryl Sandberg, for example. There could have a lot of wisdom, chochma b'goyim taimin, and she actually happens to be Jewish. So there could be a lot of wisdom there. To say it's forbidden to read this book, if it does no dvarim asurim, there's nothing that is off limits that Torah prohibits. Is it what you should be doing? L'chatchila, learn Torah, learn Chassidus all the time. Now, if someone will say to me, so as a klal, I'll say that's the standard. If someone comes to me privately as a mashpia, and you should talk to your mashpia and say, listen, here's a book I was recommended by a colleague, a friend of mine, talks about hope after her husband died, which is that's the plan B, how to survive, and it's inspiring and so on. So even though the standard may be that, but some people can't learn Chassidus all day, or they just don't understand it. So it would not give it's not a mitzvah to read it, but it could be permissible because the Alter Rebbe says if you use the book and the message, kardim lachtich bei, which means you use it like Rambam or Ramban, to use it for something in Gedusha, or the Kavanah or the intention that you use it for is for parnasa, for something that will strengthen your avodas Hashem, then that may be permissible. So there's the highest standard, and then there's looking at each case by case, the different types of books. And that's what we have to weigh. So in a way, it's not a contradiction. Someone says, listen, I only want to look in Torah, so this is going to go force that person to read this book. Now, we're not talking about people who slip and read books they shouldn't be reading in the first place, or they're reading the books, not because they're the wrong books, but they're not reading it with the right intention. Okay, we all make mistakes. I'm Chatasi ani masker. I can tell you I've read the number of books in my life that, I'm not saying for prohibited stuff, but I don't know if I used it for Kedusha. Will I be proud and say, yes, that's the highest standard? Absolutely not. So I think we need to distinguish between these two elements. The idea of what is the standard, then how do you make that standard work in your life? That's why we say, with all your heart, both the right side and the left. That's why it said, and with all your might or with all your all, to go a little further. Each one has our ma'itcha. So you have to look at where you are in life. Some people, for example, grew up and read a lot of literature. So what are you going to do now? Turn the clock back? They should learn to use what they've learned from that for Gedusha. Because at the end of the day, all the messages in any of these good books, and even things that are so-called secular, can absolutely be used for Torah and mitzvahs and for psychological reasons in helping a person in their avodas Hashem or dealing with different vices and insecurities and fears and so on. Which explains why you can go to a therapist, even the therapist is not from, but they're a mumche, they're an expert. It's doable. It's something that can work. But case by case, this has to be looked at in that fashion. Okay. The next question. Let me make sure we have time to go through all these questions. The next question is, similar vein, about non-hemisha videos. What approach should we take regarding our children watching videos, and what should we do when spouses disagree on the matter? I've noticed this situation in a lot of frum homes. Mother is tired of looking after small babies. After smaller babies, or cooking, and puts up cartoons for kids to watch and be quiet. Turns out that the amount of good kosher Hamisha videos for kids is very limited generally probably you mean, and in particular the amount that is available online on mobile devices is even more restricted. So these mothers have to resort to what is available on YouTube. We can divide these non-Hamisha content in 3 categories. 1, inappropriate. 2, borderline inappropriate. 3, potentially okay. Examples. Number 1, I would say an inappropriate cartoon is, for example, superheroes like Batman and Spider-Man. Why? Because they have cartoons that target very small kids, and then to older kids, and then to teenagers and adults. Thus, the kid could create a love for the hero when he's a child and might be tempted to watch the content when he's a teenager as well. And at this point, the content is terrible in all aspects for a Jewish person. Shtus, immorality, etc. I would put Disney cartoons here as well, as they usually expose romance and kissing not in a proper Jewish way. Number 2, the second category, borderline inappropriate. I would say these are cartoons that have a storyline, are innocent, non-violent, and targeted specifically for kids, with no content for older kids and teenagers. For example, Paw Patrol. I imagine the Rav never watched it, but I would be curious if you could spend 3 or 4 minutes to watch a few clips of this on YouTube and tell us your opinion. I can guarantee you that many Jewish kids that are sent to our chassidim spend time watching this, so perhaps it's worth your time. Category 3 is potentially okay. These, I would say, are common folk American child music videos such as ABC songs, Old MacDonald Had a Farm. They're non-kosher animals in the animation, choo-choo trains, teaching numbers, and etc. I would like to know, what is your opinion on this whole situation? As a father that is not happy with this, would it be worth the fight and stress with the spouse not to allow even contents of type 2 and 3? Please also address this very practical question. Would you be okay as a Zayda if your grandson, 3-4 years old, went to a friend's house where they would watch Paw Patrol on iPad? Okay. I actually posed this question to a parent that I know, a parent actually of one of my grandchildren, of several of my grandchildren, and I want to just cite what she wrote to me in response and then share what I said. She said, well, there are two things to address here. What are your kids are watching? And number two, as a husband dictating standards to a wife and wants her to implement something that affects her even when he's not around. So regarding to let's talk about the second thing, spouses. So I totally agree with what my daughter writes, and that is that there's no problem in a very positive and a very upbeat way that spouses who love each other should say, to share your standards, to share what you believe, and but never to force or fight over it, especially you're not the one that has to take care of the children. So if you can lift up that standard that you and your spouse can be on the same page, you can explain why it bothers you and offer some solutions and offer to be more helpful around the house or introduce different art projects or hobbies and so on, that kids that don't involve videos. But at the end of the day, she will have to make the decision. Totally agree with that because it's very easy to preach to someone else what to do, especially if they're not agreeing with you for whatever reason. Even if you may be right, it's not what you're going to go fight over. So I agree. Regarding the actual fact, this is what she writes, and again, I agree with my daughter here, and that is that YouTube unsupervised is never a good idea. One video leads to another video. Even if you find the so-called purist, you're online. Once you're online, there's really no limitations. It's very hard to limit it. You could start off at Uncle Moshe and end up with something very inappropriate, very easily. And she writes that that's not really about the three categories, because as the lines are very blurred, and even the category that you described, the third so-called potentially okay, is still not, as I said before about the books, it's not our highest standard. You may say, but the Yevid, it's not the worst. But it's not the highest standard. The values that they describe, even in old McDonald's, is not the Torah values. So you basically, what you're doing is relying on the easy babysitter, which is a video, to essentially sometimes put into your children nothing inappropriate, but definitely not the holiest standards, which is why the Rebbe spoke about animals, kosher, non-kosher. It was about giving them the holiest, giving them the best chance possible to enter in a world. They're going to be plenty exposed to all kinds of negative things. So why in the younger age, where you have control? Remember, we're not talking about an age where you have no control already. The youngest age, try to pump as much positive, healthy, pure. That's why we put the holy words around children as soon as they're born, to be around that type of environment. And especially children who are an impressionable age, so you want to make sure, you want to ingrain in them the right standards and values. Now, of course, you have to always pick your battles. Because the question now is, what are you going to do? Let's say in your home you don't show certain videos, but they go to a friend and they saw a clean cartoon. Are you going to make it, is that the end of the world? Are you going to go to war about it? So generally, and I agree again with my daughter here, that no, we don't have to go to war over it. You have to be a little chilled about it, and sometimes you save your so-called battles for places that really are important, where when lines are crossed. But to bring it into your house in a way that they watch it and it's all the time, if you have the highest standard, absolutely not. But again, this is case by case, and here's where I go and elaborate what I said with the Bob books. Can anyone live up to it? Is it possible? Can you really live in a world today and not have any videos and only use Jewish videos? We hope yes. Is it truly possible? I don't know. I was once by a shliach, and it was very interesting to me. I stayed there for Shabbos. His children were helping him in California. Really beautiful. But I saw something I never saw anywhere else. He had the whole time in the background in the intercom system, the Rebbe singing. There are these tapes where the Rebbe himself is singing the Gunim. And I was like on a loop. And it was such an uplifting experience because this was the background. And I asked him, you do this? He says, yeah, since my children are babies, this is what I do. And I found it to be such an easy thing to do because you're infusing in such an environment. Is it a replacement? Is that enough? Obviously, children need fun and they need games and they need to have their entertainment. So I can't give you a black and white answer. Just wanted to give the point is that there is a standard and you want to live up to the highest standard, especially children at young, impressionable age. Things that you can't control, going to friends and so on. But that which you could, you should control. And you have to keep as much as possible to the highest level and not compromise at all if possible. There which you can't, yes, so then, obviously category number 1, definitely not inappropriate. Even borderline inappropriate, also not. And even category 3, if there's no choice, or there's more laxity, we can put it that way around that. I'd love to hear from any one of you out there that I may have more comments on this, especially parents, and see whether we put our heads together and maybe we can come up with some even more better ideas. But above all, I want to say this: the best solution to everything is not what not to watch. It's what yes to watch. You have to introduce your children, whether it's to teach them a musical instrument or a hobby or other things, because in general videos, even the kosherist videos, a child sitting and watching, living vicariously through the hypnosis of video it's just not good for the brain. I know it's the easiest babysitter and everybody does it, but maybe we have to put our heads and figure out how to give our children different type of stimulation, friends, playing together, sports, swimming, different athletic things, music, as I said, even reading, things that are stimulating on many different levels, because the more stimulated they are, the less we'll need these stimulations, and these challenges will be somewhat easier to deal with. And that's also empowering and preempting children as they grow into adults when they don't ask their parents. Parents are not going to have that much control or any control. You'll have given them resources. The day and age, the competition is so severe for the minds and hearts of our children. It's critical to find ways to preempt it by giving them enough that they find that stimulation and don't need to go look elsewhere for it. Whereas once upon a time, you really controlled it all, because you controlled all the content that came to them. Today, content is everywhere. It's inundating us. So that's where we really need to put our heads together to figure out how to preempt, how to fill the time and the energy. And that may take more attention, because it's not just an easy video. What is your child good at? Give them challenges, give them incentives, make contests, reward them for certain achievements. But speak to their heart. Where their heart desires. Educate a child his way, find his or her unique talents, unique skills, and to get them passionate and excited about it. I see that is the best solution to most of these issues. But this doesn't negate what we spoke about as well. And hopefully this is a good beginning of a discussion, and I would love to hear more about this topic. Okay. So where are we at? We are at, I see time is tight here, and I wanted to really talk about some follow-up, which I guess I'm going to just move to next week. Yes, that's it. Okay, since a follow-up anyway, I don't feel that bad about it. I've 2 follow-ups about trusting your husband. There's been quite a few comments on that. I'm just saying it for those that have commented this. I'm not ignoring it. And the second was about follow-up on prayers from a non-Jewish origin. Also quite a few comments. But because of time, I'm going to move that to next week. I also want to give this an opportunity to state, because some of you write sometimes your questions more than once. Every question that's submitted will be addressed, unless I think it's completely, even taboo questions we address. Or even if I've addressed it in the past, I'll read the question and say we've addressed it in this episode. So in case your question has not yet been read, please be patient. We simply have a lot of questions, and I can't do them all every week. So I'm pacing them, and the next few weeks, the next several different episodes, we will address them. So please bear that in mind. Everything is received and everything is read, as I said, and I thank you for it, and I just wanted to assure you that they will be addressed. The Chassidus question for the week, and that is, Chassidus often cites the Arizal as Chidush in Tzimtzum. Yeah, Chidush. Chassidus says that Arizal Chidush. Pardes, the Ramak lo yodam in Tzimtzum. He didn't know about the Tzimtzum, and definitely the Mukabalim before him. The Arizal was Mechadesh the Tzimtzum. Where is he Mechadesh? In Eitz Chaim. As we know, most of the Arizal, all the Arizal's teachings, even though we say Kisveh, the writings of the Arizal was written by his student, Rab Chaim Vital. And many of the Svarim are called with the name Chaim, Eitz Chaim, Eitzes Chaim, and so on. So we have, in Eitz Chaim, right in the beginning, he explains that pre-tzimtzum, Haya'erein Sof, the infinite divine energy filled all reality, what would become later reality, so to speak. Later, conceptually, not in time. It filled all of existence, leaving no room for any other consciousness. The tzimtzum totally concealed that energy light, the divine light. It says Selichos alatzad. He so-called removed, we say concealed the light and moved it to the side. That's just as an analogy. So think of light that's filling the entire space and moving it and leaving like a cholul umokim pani, a hole in an empty space. Again, metaphorically speaking. In order to create space for an independent existence to emerge. Had the light been completely all omnipresent and omnipotent, which is God's power, then there'd be no room for anything else to enter, to even emerge. So here's the person's question. Since we cannot exist in the presence of pre-tzimtzum energy, the absolute and omnipresent divine consciousness, how then can we talk and try to understand about the pre-tzimtzum state and the levels there? And we see Chassidus talks about it. Not just that there's the before tzimtzum and that's it. It talks in detail about different levels and different layers and so on. We talked about once from the Rebbe's letter, how could you even be levels there? The Rebbe has a whole letter which we discussed, but here's not the question how there can be levels. The question is how can we talk about it? The mere talking about it means it's not it, because it's only possible for us to be if that tzimtzum energy is concealed. If it's concealed, we can't talk about it in any meaningful way. That's the question. Very good question. Just to continue the Rizal, afterwards he says, came a kav v'chut. A kav means a line and a thread. From the Eirei Ein Sof that was so-called moved to the side, it entered this empty space like a thread, and that thread threaded all of existence. First igulim, spheres, and then yeshir, lines, and created structure of existence as we know it. That's the kav. So the question is a very good question, because if we were able to be, it's like ilu yadaiti v'yisif. If I knew it, I would be it. So a few points, two main points. Number one is, in a chanami, you and I and regular person cannot speculate and cannot theorize and say, let's figure out what's before the tzimtzum, because we don't come from there. Our existence is dependent on the tzimtzum happening, concealing the entire presence, so we can emerge. Using the example that Chassidus gives of a teacher. Think of a most brilliant teacher. His brilliance is a completely different paradigm than anyone. And he's completely involved in that thought process of his ideas. A student comes in, or the beginner student, an average student, whatever, but they're infinitely distant from this teacher. If he continues that flow, they have no room. There's no room for them. They'll be confused. They won't understand what is being said. And even worse, it'll confuse them. Now, multiply that many times over. Imagine a godliness and mortal creatures. There's no room. So the tzimtzum is the teacher. What he does is he conceals his ideas. He withdraws them, so to speak, within himself. So his mind remains completely intact. The ideas remain intact, but he's silent. He's not expounding on them. He's not revealing them. Thus, the student has space. And now, then comes a thread, a slow thread, where he spoon feeds the student. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, simple ideas lead to bigger ideas, and so on. So that's the example the Alter Rebbe gives in the Likutei Torah, the end of the Vayikra, the Sofis, and Lavan Inyam Mashakos Beit Chaim, and other places to explain the tzimtzum. But for the student to talk about what's going on in the mind of the teacher, it would never happen. Because that mind, that brilliance, has to be concealed. That's the prerequisite for the student to even exist. So in a chanami, as I said, we can't go ahead and talk about it. However, what happens if the teacher himself decides he wants to reveal to us what that brilliance is like before he conceals it, or at least an element of it, and he does so through his Torah, and through his Moshe Rabbeinu, and through the Moshe Rabbeinu of every generation, the Rabbeim. So it's not that we sat down and said, you know what, I figured everything out till the tzimtzum, now let's enter and figure out, extrapolate and try to analyze what's going on before the tzimtzum. No, it was revealed to us. Why? Because Hashem, God, wants a relationship with us, not just post-tzimtzum. He wants us to relate to pre-tzimtzum. The teacher wants us not just to understand what he's spoon-feeding to us, but also what's in his mind. And he reveals that to us. Now, how can we relate it if it's so intense and doesn't leave any room for us? We can relate it because since it's the same teacher that's teaching with the light that comes the kav after the tzimtzum, and the kav can lead you as you retrace the steps. Think of a student. Even if a student starts with aleph beis, slowly the aleph beis, they begin to form ideas. And those ideas develop, and they can start appreciating the teacher to the point that you could even appreciate the teacher on the teacher's level. As he says in the beginning of Samach Vov, that initially, if the teacher would reveal anything, it would be impossible for us to exist, to the recipients. But once there was the concealment, then now our containers, there's room for our containers, they can expand, and receive all that light before the tzimtzum. And even more than that, a chiddush, even more than what was lifnei the tzimtzum. That's the biggest thing. So that's one key point. The second key point is this, because it still begs the question, fine, we're able to reach there ultimately, but how can we talk about it right now? We're not on that level. That level is pre-tzimtzum consciousness, and it says clearly that Eirei Sof, that didn't leave room for anything else, so how can we even go there? To stop to talk? Of course you can talk about anything. So the word is like this, you can talk about it because you can, in some way, even relate to it. You can relate because, number one, you relate to the fact that God is so beyond us. So by knowing that the tzimtzum conceals the divine presence to the point that we cannot exist without that being concealed. If it was revealed, we can't exist. It teaches you how far and beyond God is. And that's also a lesson. It's a lesson in the awesomeness of godless, of the greatness of the divine. So the Eir of the Kav teaches us how to relate to godliness. Like, for example, it's relating to godliness that we have a soul within us, God sustains us, He feeds us, and we recognize and we appreciate the blessings in our lives. That's Mamala Kalam, that's Kav. But what about appreciating the divine that's beyond us, that we don't even feel or sense? So that's why we're taught about Lifnei Tzimtzum, that to realize that there's a whole other reality. Don't think that the godliness within you and within nature, Elokim, Gematria Tev, is all there is. There's a level called Havaya, a level called Sevav Kalam, and that's a Ma'er. And so that itself teaches us the also relationship, because a good relationship is not just how God relates to you, but also how God is beyond you. And that also teaches us element of Yira and awe, more than just Ava and closeness, Yira and awe, Kabbalah Seil, that we are completely apart. And that too is a lesson in our Avad. And finally, the third point I want to make, just to use an example. Think of existence as a piece of art. An artist made art. You see art, I see a piece of art on the wall. You say, beautiful, beautiful piece of art. You start analyzing the art, and you can come away and figure out and extrapolate what the artist may be like. Who made this art? But as much as you deduce, what are you ultimately going to go away with? With certain limited, very limited understanding. But then let's, for argument's sake, say the artist comes and tells you, he's standing near you and he says, here's the art that I created, and I want to tell you something about it. Obviously, he can illuminate elements of the art that you would never have figured out on your own, because he created the art. But then you come to realize something else. Is this the only piece of art the artist can create? Absolutely not. He can create, he has created and could create many different pieces of art. If it's an infinite artist, he can create infinite pieces of art. He created one called the 10 spheres that we see, the beauty of this universe, which evolves from the 10 spheres within Asiya, which evolves from Yetzirah, from Bria, from Atzilus, all the way to the 10 hidden spheres, Lifnei Tzimtzum, how God envisioned this art. But beyond that, there's all different types of art. Sfira Saint Ketz. He can create infinite types of art, many different types of art that we don't have any inkling about. And you understand that. You see, one artist created only one piece of art. No, sure he's capable of doing more. I just don't know what, because I cannot fathom. But then it goes a step further. Is he even an artist? Because in the infinite pieces of art are all still an artist that can create so much art. The artist can also be a father, can be a husband, can be a wife, it can be a person as many other. I'm saying even on a human level. So then you see that not only can he create many arts, that you only see one piece of art in relation to all the pieces of art, you don't even realize there's a whole personality here that has nothing to do with being an artist altogether. That's essentially how we understand Lifnei Tzimtzum. What are we doing? We don't understand it directly, but we're saying, okay, this is the art God created. Now we know that art originates before the Tzimtzum, when the artist envisioned this art. That's what Chassidus calls Shir Atzmei B'Kayach. He estimated, he imagined, he envisioned what would be what is going to be coming. So we call that the 10 hidden spheres, as Chassidus explains at length in the beginning of Ayin Beis, at length and many other places. Then beyond that, higher than that is an artist, an infinite possibility. Behind that is not even an artist. All this, we're talking about Lifnei Tzimtzum. Now, are we experiencing Lifnei Tzimtzum? No, because if we experienced it, as I said, we wouldn't be able to exist. That's why it had to be concealed. But that doesn't mean we cannot in some way through process of elimination, through Yedias HaShlila, which means by saying, by understanding what it is, you see the art, you realize how much more is behind this art. That's how we can relate to even those levels. Okay. 3 essays, as we do, customary to do, 3 interesting essays. One is called Consistent Kavanah, Keeping Daily Prayers Alive by Yehudis Fishman, age 74, teacher, Boulder, Colorado. And this is a very fascinating essay. I really enjoyed it, about davening. She begins that once in my 20s, she writes, I attended an OU convention during the Torah portion of Baal Escha. A prominent rabbi was referring to the opening commandment in Rashi about Aharon's lighting, and he spoke about what was the greatness of Aharon, that he did what he was supposed to do and never changed. The rabbi replied with the Chassidic comment that every single day Aharon approached the Menorah with the newness and excitement of the first time. I responded, oh, I already heard that comment. And the rabbi smiled and gave me a lesson I never forgot. I think you heard it. That means you didn't really hear it. If you think you heard it, that means you really didn't hear it even the first time. Because that's the whole point, that to hear it every time anew, even though you're hearing the same thing. And goes on to speak about mitzvahs and Torah, that often it could be done by rote. We read the same parsha, we say the same prayers. How do you make it dynamic and exciting with a vitality that's like new every time? The Baal Shem Tov, she brings a story, the Baal Shem Tov once saying he came to daven in a certain shul because the prayers are all stuck there, it's all crowded, the prayers are not going anywhere. How do you keep them fresh and not bored? That's the theme of this essay, and I would say I was surprised that very well done. Talking about prayers, a whole bunch of different discussions about the challenges of the mind-heart barrier. That on the mind you feel sometimes that something is very new, but your heart, you just go back, you gravitate back to your patterns. And she brings a poem by Rilke, R-I-L-K-E, called The Panther. The panther paces listlessly in its cage with dull eyes. Here is the last verse. Only at times the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly, an image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. Here's, by the way, an example of using a secular poem, but using it for Kedusha. That's why I chose to read it. And describes the conflict that even though we may be excited about ideas, but we can't implement them in a fresh way because we're stuck in our patterns. And talking about Avodah Shebelev, that davening is the heart. How do you get that heart going, not just the mind? And then it discusses in detail the dynamics of the struggle, the two-soul concept, that the Nefesh Elokis wants to be alive like that. The Nefesh Habamis tends to gravitate towards toward monotony. And brings a beautiful story from Levitzig Baditchever, that once by Simchas Torah, before we say Ata Aresa, he had his talis on, and he was trying to say it, and he put it on his talis, and he kept on being very frustrated. Then finally he threw it on the lectern, the talis, and walked away. The congregation was aghast. So they explained what was going on. So he said, I was having an argument with my Yetzer Hara, who's saying, listen, I'm always there with you. No matter what you do, whether you do an Aveda for sure, when you do a mitzvah, I'm with you. You're davening, I'm with you. So he was basically insisting that wherever he went, I will always be with you. So the Rebbe finally said to his inner voice, to his Yetzer Hara, if you're with me all the time in these holy occasions, then why don't you say the prayers yourself? So he threw down the talis and walked away. To demonstrate that you can't do anything without me. So it's a very interesting word of how to engage and understand the passion necessary when you do davening. Drawing from the highest realms, the cosmic effects, and how to reach your peak level of performance in your davening. So the take-home, she writes, is in response to my opening dilemma of how to keep daily prayer fresh and new. I respond, we are both capable and deployed to activate our renewed souls through internalizing such principles as the power of pre-prayer preparation, the awareness that the struggle itself can be a sign of victory. Prayer reaches the highest levels of reality, and impacts and transforms all parts of existence, both within and without. And like the Alter Rebbe promises in chapter 28, through our utmost exertion during prayer to awaken the deepest yearnings of our hearts, God will assist in protecting us against negative distractions as darkness is pushed away by light. Very nicely done. Essay number 2, Silence in a Crowded Room by H. Schild, age 53, Spring Valley, New York. I also enjoyed this one. This is about how to get shuls to be quiet during davening. So it was something quite refreshing. I haven't heard anyone write about that. So basically, talking during davening, formerly known as Selichos Chulin. It's something that first it gives the history that this is not just a modern phenomenon. You have already Rabbi Avram ben the Rambam said that the problem of chatting during davening was so spread out, so widespread that the Alter Rambam considered to be meleminate chazar sashatz, because people would speak. The Tesis Yontiv writes about it to make a mishabeirach for all those that are speaking. He wrote a special mishabeirach for those for those that don't speak. For those that don't speak, to reward them. Anyway, regardless, the bottom line is it's not a new modern phenomenon, and discusses what were the prior interventions. Most of them is about embarrassing violators, and or having fire and brimstone sermons, and so on. The Chassidic solution she goes into, and very well done, bringing from Rab Shlomo Chaim, the great mashpia, about how understanding that the lowest worlds are really the presence of the lowest worlds has within them the presence of the upper worlds. Atzilus is not in heaven. Atzilus is right here. And the contemplation that when you're in a shul, that you can have Atzilus right here, and all the Hecher and Madregas creates a higher level of sensitivity. Because it comes down to not just that you talk, because you don't recognize where you are. Like when Yaakov Avinu fell asleep on the mountain, he didn't know where he was. Once you knew where he was, you couldn't believe it. If you knew where you were, you're standing in Kodesh Kodashim, you're staying in a place that's holy, you're standing in front of the Rebbe, you're not going to behave in that way. So it's a desensitization that's going on. So in other words, to create that sense of knowing where you are and not allowing yourself to be distracted. Goes on to explain how we can do this guided imagery in ways that we can actually come to a place where one must first intend to know the significance of where one is before proceeding to pray. Although our concept of perceiving that all worlds are there in the room with you might sound paradoxical, it is well founded in the Chassidic concept cited above that this will lead to proper behavior in the minyan by appreciating of indeed that everything depends on you. So again, very creative and very interesting taking on such a topic that we know is not easy, and using Chassidus of how we would address such a thing, which is not just through saying Musar, but to create a higher level of sensitivity and awareness. Finally, the third one, Seeing Through the Darkness, by Aaron Shollar, age 16, Yeshiva's Boys School of Pittsburgh, from Far Rockaway, New York. Basically talks about the terribly dark world of immorality and corruption in which we live, and how we have to look at it, that evil is really not an entity of its own. It's only possible because Hashem created the tzimtzum to allow an independent existence to. And describes it in, I would say, very balbatish, a practical way. It's not the most original essay, it's been said, but it's said nevertheless in his terms, 16-year-old boy, and I found it to be very encouraging. Definitely good, worthwhile reading. It speaks about very practically of how we can deal with the difficulties of life by seeing why they're here and why were they placed here. Quoting the Rebbe about a letter to the Holocaust survivor in the same context, that idea. So with that, we shall conclude this episode 179 of MyLife Chassidus Applied. Everyone should have a ksiv v'chsimeteva. Use these last days from Chai El till the end of the year in the most fullest possible way. Again, our prayers and our hopes go out to all those that are under any type of duress or challenges due to the hurricanes that are blowing. And we should only, as I said at the outset of this discussion, only have winds, ruach, tashav elokim asher nasana. Winds and spirits are only holy ones of tshuva that elevate the world and elevate it to ruach shel Mashiach, the spirit and wind of Mashiach that hovers over the water. With the Gula Amitis Vashlema, even before the end of this year. We're here every Sunday, except when it's Yom Tov, and we'll announce those beforehand. Every Sunday, so next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., when we will continue with episode 180. Please send us your questions, your comments at meaningfullife.com/mylife.